40 riders per year, every year. And if we compare that to how we're actually tracking for general vehicle trauma, we see that vehicle fatalities have seen a downturn in the rates of people that are being killed with, car-to-car crashes. We're not seeing that same level of downward trend for cyclists and riders. So there's certainly lots that can be done within this space. And one of the reasons that we're so excited to be delivering this type of training to hopefully see much improved statistics going forward. Unsurprisingly, we do see that around 83% of all riders that are killed identify as male. I say unsurprisingly, as men tend to ride in more high-risk scenarios, so high-speed environments, rural locations, and things like that. And they tend to be a little bit more risk prone, like willing to accept risk. And yeah, so around 83% of the cohort there is male. So I hope that just gives you a bit of context, some of the statistics. We haven't seen significant reductions in cycling trauma over the last few decades, and something that all levels of government do want to commit to improving the ability for those that ride to ride safely around their networks, and something that we all aspire to achieve. Today's module is all going to be about roundabouts. I, of course, could have bumped this into our previous module of intersections, as noted last time, because roundabout is an intersection form, but there are specific issues associated with roundabouts that it's best left as its own separate topic. There's no Wally for today, so rest assured you don't need to be looking out for Wally in his little hat there. Kind of looks like a Christmas hat as well, because he won't be popping up in today's slides. We are recording it though. In the 360-degree footage, you would have seen two examples of riding through different intersections. On the left there is Melbourne's protected intersection. And example number 2 was using a hook turn to complete a right turn movement. Love to hear in the chat how you experienced those two and if you had any issues with getting the 360 working. As I mentioned, today we will be focused on roundabouts. We'll have a very, very similar structure to our previous module, where we'll first discuss this idea of protected roundabouts. So previously it was protected intersections. There's also a term that is used, which is protected roundabouts. And that is what we see as, the gold standard for safe cycling treatments at roundabouts. We'll talk about what are the actual design elements that make up a protected roundabouts. Once again, go through some international examples, as well as one that's been installed here in Melbourne. So those are got to be like that's what we're offering as best practice, but we also need to think about other scenarios where we do have roundabouts, such as multi-lane roundabouts. We'll talk about all the risks and design considerations associated with riding through those environments. Very, very stressful for those that have done it. I'm sure you can appreciate that. And also have a chat regarding local roundabouts as well. Really good guidance document that I popped up on the screen there is the VicRoads, or Department of Transport and Planning, guidance on bicycle and pedestrian treatments at roundabouts. It's kind of well documented that roundabouts do improve the level of safety for general traffic. So they're very, very good at slowing down vehicles because there's this giant circle in the middle of their carriageway. So they're not going to, just like run a red light and cross intersection crash types. That's kind of greatly reduced. The other real benefit of the roundabout is just the angles of those conflicts. If you do have two vehicles that are colliding, they're more likely hitting each other at this type of angle where they can kind of glance off each other and gradually dissipate that energy within that crash. So it's well understood that roundabouts do offer and improve benefits for general traffic. However, riders and cyclists don't see that benefit, and in fact, they often fare worse than what would be a signalized intersection. So it's something that's really important to acknowledge, that yes, general traffic may have those safety improvements, but that does not extend to riders and also people just walking across at those areas. And we'll talk about why that is in a moment. The other document that we do refer to is this research report, which is bicycle safety at roundabouts, which once again just is testament to how big an issue this is, where Austroads is actually commissioning an independent research to be completed to determine, what type of treatments are available and why is this a risk for cyclists. Okay. A protected roundabout looks something like this. This is an artistic rendition of Melbourne's protected roundabout. And what I want to show you just from this little image is the main criteria for a protected roundabout is where you've got the circulating area, which is where general traffic drive or where they use that space. You don't want to push riders into that space at all. You want to give them a separate facility that's away from that circulating area. So you can see in this example, if you wanted to turn right, you've got this facility that extends beyond where that circulating area is, so that there's no conflict point within that circle itself. The other benefit that we see with this particular example, that is not a requirement for a protected roundabout, but is a really good idea, is to have all of those conflict points raised. So we've spoken about it a few times now, but the idea of raising your conflict points ensures that you are reducing vehicle speeds through there. So if there were to be a collision, it's hopefully less than that 30 km/h speed threshold, and therefore, hopefully riders are able to get up and walk and leave a healthy, normal life after that collision. But the other benefit with the raised is it really emphasizes that this is a priority crossing for both pedestrians and riders, and you as the motorist need to yield. It's a high-level view at the protected roundabout, but I will get into the details in a moment. Before I do, though, let's just talk about something. Let's just have a look at this diagram here, where we've got a multi-lane approach to a roundabout, and we've got three riders within the circulating area, A, B, and C. And Marissa, if you don't mind launching a poll, I've got a question to kick off today's discussion, which is, which of these riders do you believe is most at risk? Cyclist A, cyclist B, cyclist C. I'll give you 20 seconds just to fill that one in.
Going ahead, we've just got a few people asking, was that a real standard example, or what happens with queuing vehicles across the crossing points?
Great question. So we do talk about that in just a moment with regards to queuing. Okay. Ideally, you'd want to provide a setback from the circulating area to enable one vehicle to store without blocking the circulating area, but we've got a few examples to see how that actually works out
great
in the real world.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll give it 5 more seconds. Remember, you're not marked on this, so don't get stressed if you're not sure. 3, 2, 1, and we'll end the poll and share the results. And yes, from what I'm seeing, at my end, I can see that there is a little bit of diversity in the answers, which is actually very promising. I like to see that, because even in the Austroads guide, they fully acknowledge that all of these riders are at risk, and we should be considering all of their perspectives. So just to talk you through that and, you know, why this could be an issue. The triangles that we're looking at there are the driver's point of view, or their sight lines, what they're focusing on. And the yellow vehicle there may see that the adjacent purple vehicle has already entered the roundabout and just assumed that they're good to go, because they've already just basically focused on their right-hand side, which means rider A is not necessarily where they're focused, and they're just looking at the adjacent vehicle. That one's going, I can go, and that's where that type of collision can occur. Rider B seems to be in a very difficult predicament, because they're not within the sight lines of that purple vehicle nor the red vehicle. And just looking at the way that this is currently staged, it does look like there may be a collision there. Just the rider going straight into the purple car there. That looks to me like an example of that phenomena which is referred to as look but fail to see. There's lots of videos on YouTube if you're interested in learning more about that, but it's basically this idea where us as drivers, because we've brought up with cars, and, you know, we've got families who've got cars, and when we were kids we had cars. We've just got this idea that when we look at the road, we look for cars and we look for that big mass. So cyclists, because they're much smaller, it actually takes more cognitive effort to see them, or to actually acknowledge that they are there as well. So whilst you may physically, you know, see them, you may not process that they are there and they're also part of the carriageway. It's very interesting. So yeah, that kind of look, yeah, fail to see how to look. I forget which one it is. It's quite an interesting way, and it is another kind of common crash type that occurs within these environments. Our riders C there, once again, the purple there may be able to see C and could be slamming on the brakes at the last second before entering that roundabout. However, yellow behind them may not know what's going on and may also just head straight into that roundabout, potentially colliding with C there. That's an example of that dynamic visual obstruction that I alluded to at the end of last session, where yellow cannot see through purple. So it's a dynamic visual obstruction. It's not as if that physical obstruction is always there. It's only a risk at certain times. But as I mentioned, wherever you do have multi-lanes and they're turning movements, you can have that as a risk. So in other words, I don't think there's one right answer there. And I think, you know, each of those cyclists are at risk. So good to see we've got a bit of diversity in answers. I'll have a quick chat now about some of the crash types that we do see with riders within roundabouts. So this was a study that was completed 10 years ago now, where they basically went through the police reports to get the detailed information for how riders are being struck by motorists at roundabouts or within the roundabout area, and managed to conclude that there's these different types of categories where we're seeing this trauma occurring. So the way to read this figure is the red lines are representing a vehicle, and the green line is, the green dotted line is a cyclist. So the predominant crash type that we're seeing at 68% is a vehicle that's at the hold line and basically fails to give way to a rider and enters the roundabout. So entering motorist versus circulating cyclist. And that just acknowledges the statement that I made before of that looking but failing to see. So a motorist at the yield line looking for cars, seeing that there's a gap in vehicle traffic and entering the roundabout without acknowledging that there could also be riders within there. So that's what we're seeing as the predominant source of trauma. Moving around the roundabout now, we've got cyclists crossing as pedestrians at about 8%. So this is where we may not have had any riding facilities within the roundabout, or the riders may not have felt comfortable doing so, so they're using an adjacent footpath. And the reason that these locations are quite risky, both for the cyclist perspective and as pedestrians, is because as you're crossing over here and you get to this carriageway on the roadway there, that's the exit leg for vehicles, and where vehicles tend to have their, so where motorists tend to have their foot on the accelerator. So they're not necessarily expecting to see crossing users there, nor have they got their foot on the brake to, I suppose, help with that. So that's where you can see that level of risk exacerbated. 9% are exiting motor vehicles versus circulating cyclists. And this one always catches me a bit by surprise, because anecdotally, this is the one that I would rate the highest. So that's my own subjective experience and bias. As a rider, that's the one that makes me feel so nervous, where if I was performing, say, a right turn at the roundabout, like just draw it on here, like this, and a vehicle behind me is going through, that collision is generally what I'm most nervous about. However, it is 9% of the crashes that were analysed as part of this study. So it's not necessarily saying that that is the bulk of the trauma occurring. And I think that's a really good reflection, that you don't necessarily rely on your own instincts or your biases, but instead refer to literature and actual research and evidence that has been conducted, because that's is not going to be, swayed by those personal, reliance on data. Anyway, last one was the side swipe within roundabouts. So that's basically vehicles where they're leaving their traffic lane and perhaps entering the adjacent bicycle lane. We're seeing that about the 10%, but by far the most common is that look but fail to see, where drivers are failing to yield at roundabouts for currently circulating cyclists. Now, protected roundabout, some may see it as this type of treatment, which I absolutely love. This is the Hovenring in the Netherlands. It is not an example of a protected roundabout, but it is pretty cool. It is an example of grade separation. So all your cycling and pedestrian traffic don't have to interact with that massive motorway going on down there below. The Dutch just wouldn't see that as a feasible solution. So instead, they're just going to grade separate the whole thing. Bicycle path, you get to enjoy the sky and you can ride amongst the birds, and all of the pollution and traffic can stay there on the carriageway level. So really, really interesting example. It's not an example of a protected roundabout, but if you do have the ability to do grade separation, that's by far the most attractive option. But we'll get back into our protected roundabout. So I already alluded to it a little bit before, which is we don't like to see our riders forced into the circulating area. And the trauma that we just went through before, all of those percentages, we can see that a lot of that is occurring within that circulating area. So we want to get riders out of that space. And what that means is we are providing protection or separation so riders deviate away from the circulating area. I'm going to use that word a lot today, circulating area. And then they cross over at very distinct points. So there's no confusion as to where those conflict points could be. You would also typically, highlight those with conflict paint and things like that. And then, they continue their journey from whichever leg. So you would love to see that all of that protected roundabout is a continuous movement for riders so that they have priority going through the whole way, because it can be very, very uncomfortable if there's ambiguity there, or if you're providing that priority to drivers where it may be incorrectly assumed that that is priority for riders. So just to talk through the design elements of the protected roundabout. Once again, I'm going to have to translate these because this is an international resource, but from a principle level, still applies to where we are working. And we've got our bicycle crossing area, which is, once again, we can see away from the circulating area. We've got number 2 here, which is saying yield lines. So that's what we would say is, you know, the give way, hold lines or things like that, so that vehicles that are approaching that conflict point are aware that they don't have right of way to go through there. Instead, the priority is given to pedestrians and cyclists crossing there. Really, really, really positive thing to do. This number 3, I'm going to just cross off because it doesn't make a lot of sense. You wouldn't be doing a yield line for both riders and vehicles. You'd pick one or the other. That creates ambiguity. So we'd be recommending make the vehicles yield where you're doing protected roundabouts and provide that continuity for riders. Number 4, 5-foot curb radius. That's just too much detail. We don't need to worry about that. Number 5 is a channelizing island. So this point here is just to capture that, once again, we are separating our pedestrians and our riders. We're not creating one shared area where both of those users have to cross. So I spoke about this previously with our protected intersections. You don't really want to bring them up to a, you know, quite a stressful part of the network approaching a roundabout and have them commingle with pedestrians or riders with pedestrians. Instead, you want to keep that separation all the way through and, you know, continuing all the way to the exit as well. So the use of that channelizing island is just to really demarcate. This is pedestrian, this is for cyclists. I wouldn't say it's an essential feature of your protected roundabout. It's just been used here to clearly articulate that they are 2 separate parts of travel. Number 6 there is just signage. That's not the signage that we would use. We would use give way, and depending on which jurisdiction that you're in, you may have supplementary plates just to say give way to peds and cyclists and things like that. I'm going to pause there and I'll check in with Catherine to see if we've got any questions so far.
Oh, I'm a bit slow on the old clicking there. Sorry, I think it must be the heat in this jumper.
Oh, yeah. I've got the dust as well. My nose is going off now. It was the wrong choice.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, classic. Yes, just an observation. With the raised crossings and markings, what's the preference? Is it shark's teeth or piano keys?
As far as I'm aware, everywhere in Australia does piano keys. Shark's teeth is US and Europe.
There was someone noted they also do it in WA as well. It's a bit of a mix between piano and shark's
really? Yeah.
teeth. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Well,
definitely
that's good to
a
know.
preference in Victoria, isn't it, for the piano keys?
Yeah, piano key
Yeah.
line markings, definitely.
Yeah.
That, I thought
definitely.
that was more all across Australia, so I didn't know that WA
Yeah.
did both. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I know New
I-
Zealand does the shark's teeth as well, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
WA likes to do their own thing.
Yeah. Why
Yeah.
not? Bit of
Unique.
diversity.
Yeah, diversity. Love it.
Mm.
I get the other question that came up earlier, Max, was what's the speed environment that you would be championing the separated facilities for at roundabouts?
Right. So we'll give a prize out there. These are more appropriate at, I suppose, semi-local type of roundabouts. You wouldn't really be recommending these on multi-lane roundabouts. We've got arterial connections or anything like that, because the volumes as well as that multi-lane arrangement can create pretty significant sideline issues. In fact, you generally wouldn't have crossing points that would be over multiple lanes anyway. So like a zebra crossing, we don't like to see it over more than one lane before there's a break.
Yeah.
So multi-lane roundabouts, I wouldn't suggest. In terms of speeds, that would then bring it down to that 40 to 50, that kind of mark there.
Yeah. I was thinking between, I mean, we don't really see that many 30-kilometre zones,
Oh,
which
yeah.
hoping we're to roll out more in the future, but between the 30 to 60, and I guess 60 is probably a bit on the higher side. But
No,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, as you're saying, ideally you'd like to see that impact speeds where the conflict point is to be managed at 30 kilometers. So
Yeah.
if you had the raised crossing point at 30, but the operating speed was 60, it might be too big of a jump for traffic to be able to hit that, you know. So that's probably just another consideration there. It's not
Yeah.
impossible.
That's it. And just one more around capacity impacts with the facility and ensuring that vehicles aren't blocking the circulating lane.
Good question. We'll give another prize out there. Yeah, it can happen. And certainly we've noticed that in Melbourne's protected roundabouts that can happen. This is not a solution that is going to improve congestion. This is not a solution that's going to make traffic flow easier here for vehicles. It is a solution to improve cycling safety. And I've got some examples that kind of show how depending on the footprint that you've got, you can help mitigate that risk to some extent. But you know, there are variables. But yeah, just to reiterate, this is very much a solution focused on improving cyclist safety, and there may be other, you know, issues that you need to consider as part of being a project. Yep.
Yeah, don't worry about the level of service, people.
That's what I keep saying. Yeah.
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 All right, I'll hand over to Marissa if Marissa's seen any questions come through in the chat.
Thanks, Catherine. There's some chat about does that rule only refer to a cyclist turning right from a left lane in the roundabout? And then they're referring to Rule 119.
I might need a bit more info for that. I'm happy to follow that one offline, Marissa.
Yeah, I'm not sure which slide that one was referring to. Sorry, Beck, you might need to give me a bit more information on that one. Yeah, perhaps we'll leave that one till later. I'll get a bit more information from Beck.
Yeah, no, that's
all. Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
Cool. So I'll just hop into some examples now. And the first one that I've got here is out of the Netherlands. This is in Assen. And it is showing a very large footprint. So this is a protected roundabout which has quite a lot of room to play with in terms of the road reserve. So just want to show you, you know, I suppose those features that are spoken about. You've got that circulating area there. Riders are not being, you know, encouraged to ride through there. Instead, they've got these basically off-road facilities where you can pass along. And if you wanted to do a right turn, you could do that kind of movement. This is actually a bi-directional example, so you can travel in both directions. So if you're doing right turn, you can also just take this little shortcut, which is perhaps more attractive. But you can see that there's not really a whole lot of incentive there for riders to access the carriageway at all. Basically just stay on your path, your separated facility, and ride through this. Now, we already had a lot of questions about the congestion issues and things like that and queuing. And in this example, it's pretty convenient that I've actually got two vehicles kind of propped there on this aerial. And it's basically, it's got enough space there to let two exiting vehicles prop and wait for any pedestrians or cyclists that may be crossing before, you know, they're potentially going to be blocking the circulating area. There is a risk of bringing this conflict point further and further down in that riders may not use it. So if you are really worried about your queuing, and you think, well, I'm just going to put this crossing location further and further away so I can get double the amount of vehicles that can queue there. You then run the risk of riders not using that because it's far too circuitous and it's just not an attractive direct route for them. So I'd certainly be wary of that one as a solution. As I mentioned at the start, as a rule of thumb, we tend to aim for one vehicle as has that storage area, but you basically are pretty constrained by what your existing road reserve allows. So I'll show you what this one looks like out on the grounds. So you can see it is fairly wide, and there's quite a bit of space there, but quite a comfortable facility for both riders and pedestrians to travel through there, and certainly no encouragement there to access that circulating area. So that's an example of where you've got quite large footprint available. I've got another example here in the Netherlands. This is just outside Rotterdam. And this one is where you're in a more constrained location. Now, this one is perhaps more attractive for riders because we can see that's the circulating area. And this one on the outside is the path that riders would take, which is basically just an outer ring. And the reason I say it may be more attractive is because the path that riders would take in this example is just one smooth curve, which we know that riders tend to prefer, rather than have like little jagged turns and sharp corners and things like that. Riders don't really tend to like that. So this smooth radius would be quite attractive. However, the downside of this is the offset from my circulating area to where the conflict point is. So this offset is significantly reduced. And that's why what we run into troubles with is, as we can see in this vehicle that's exiting the roundabout, they've basically got a very, very limited opportunity to make eye contact with this rider who's also coming around at the same time. So this, to more or less extents, is very, very similar to creating the on-road bicycle lanes through roundabouts on the periphery. There is a little bit of separation here, but I just wanted to show you the kind of the two extents of a protected roundabouts. This has got very, very limited separation. The other one was quite a lot of separation. So the separation, I mean the offset from the circulating area to where the crossing point is. So just to sell that message home, we are, just to give you an example, for this Porsche driver here, and if we put yourself in the perspective of that Porsche driver, and they wanted to exit at this leg, the rider around would be going through this, or turning right. Very, very difficult if you're in that Porsche driver's seat to be able to make eye contact or acknowledge what direction that rider is traveling. And it's just an uncomfortable situation. And as I've spoken about many times, you really want to ensure at your conflict points you don't have that ambiguity and you've got your sight lines maximized. So it's just nice and easy. That's where the rider is. I need to slow down and give way. So this is on the other side of that spectrum of what a protected roundabout may be referred to as. I also thought I'd just show one which is kind of middle ground. This one is in Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And it basically allows for what I said was that general rule of thumb is allow for one vehicle to be able to use the exits as a storage space before blocking the circulating area. And this is more or less that design. They have created that smooth radius curve all the way there for riders. So they've got that nice riding experience around there. And just even this slight increase in the offset that's provided from the circulating area to the conflict point really does a lot of improvements for those sight lines. So just to show you an example of this one installed, out on site, you can see this vehicle that is yielding at this location has a much improved ability to be able to see riders that are crossing in front of them and knows, okay, I need to give them priority, and there's no awkward angles for them to try and turn around and look in their blind spot or in their wing mirrors to be able to see any riders that are there. So this is kind of what we would see as more of a typical practice of a protected roundabouts. But as I said at the start, you really are somewhat constrained by what your existing road reserve has, where the end of the reserve finishes. But all of these things are important to consider. Now, I want to show this video of an example of a protected roundabout in action, just to show you that, it's not a theoretical thing. They do exist and they do work incredibly well. So just have a look at how riders are traveling through this area. We've got a bus approaching as well. And, all of these kind of conflicts are very well defined. The continuity for riders is also very flowing, so riders aren't stop-starting. And it's just wanted to reiterate that these aren't theoretical treatments. They do exist and they work very well, and really help riders feel much safer at these roundabout locations. While this is going, I'll have a chat to Catherine to see if we've got any other questions.
Hello. Yes, not in the Q&A. The Q&A is pretty good, but there's some general chat going on in the chat window. I guess one of those was sorry, just having a look. I guess just some confusion on who's giving way to who on some of the examples that you've been showing, which, I guess we don't have time to sort of go through all of that. And that's something that we can talk to a bit later on, because I know you talk about that a bit later. Is that right, Max?
So certainly in this example, your riders and pedestrians have right of way at each of those crossing points. And it is the case for the ones that were shown prior as well. The only exception is the first one in the Netherlands that I showed. There is a bit of ambiguity there, because there is
the first one. Yeah.
There's a stop
Thanks,
line
Richard.
for riders as well as for traffic as well. So it is very confusing. I agree. Good pickup.
Yes.
Give a prize out there.
Prize to Richard.
Generally, we just like to see that priority extended at each leg for riders.
Yeah. Just also acknowledgement to movement and place as well, and that framework, and when, I think that's a good tool to reference on when to put in these protected cycle facilities.
Absolutely, yeah. So I do talk about that in a little bit as well, but yeah, I completely agree with that.
Do these arrangements result in an increase in tail end crashes within the roundabout?
It is possible. So if you are getting, more stopping occurring and things like that, it is possible that that risk of rear end crashes are occurring. However, if you were looking at this from a risk perspective, where you consider the severity of a crash and you compare the two. So on one scenario, you've got riders accessing the circulating area. If they are struck by a vehicle, it's likely going to be a pretty serious outcome, like hospitalization or, fatal outcome. Whereas if you compare that to the scenario where we're going to protect our riders and instead we may have an elevated likelihood of rear-end crashes, the severity associated with rear-end crashes is incredibly minimal. It is a job for the panel beater and for insurance companies, but people walk out of those things and there's generally nothing but a bit of money exchange. So from a safe system framework, and if you are thinking about managing severity of these crash outcomes, I'd still be favoring protecting riders as opposed to just every of those very minor collisions that could occur.
And someone just noted as well that on-road cycle lanes are not recommended by Ausroads anymore. Is that correct?
Within multi-lane roundabouts, that's correct. Yeah, I've got a
Thanks.
slide on that as well.
Yeah, great. And just one question popped in the Q&A. Who would be, what would be the ideal treatment scenario for cyclists and pedestrians in turbo roundabouts?
Good question. If you're saying ideal, I would definitely say grade separation there, because you do have multi-lanes there, and I would be pretty uncomfortable putting something like this in where there isn't a significant separator space between each of those traffic lanes. So I would be saying grade sep. Otherwise, depending on volumes and things, you may have to actually look at just prioritizing that movement flow and making cyclists yield, and they don't have priority going through there.
Right. Thanks, Max. That's it for now. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, we'll have a quick chat through Melbourne's protected roundabout. And I've got a little before and after here. So we can see in the before case scenario, we've got tiny little on-road bicycle lane that runs in the periphery of the roundabout. Very, very dangerous place to situate yourself if you are riding, because as I said before, it can be very confusing for drivers, for them to know if you're doing a through movement or a right turn. So it can just be confusing. And also drivers tend to want to overtake you within the roundabout and may misjudge that, and that's where you get those side swipe type crashes occurring for riders as well. So don't like this treatment much at all as it was, but if we compare that to what we've got now, which is a protected roundabout, and I'm going to just zoom in on this in a bit more detail. And the question that I've got for the group, so get ready to provide responses in the chat, is I've spoken a lot about the benefits associated with protected roundabouts for riders, but what are the disadvantages for riders as well? So have a look at this aerial and let me know in the chat what you think could be a disadvantage for a rider. And whilst you have a think about that, I'm going to just put my microphone on mute and take off my jumper because I'm sweating.
And how are you holding up there with the Christmas jumper?
I might have to.
You're going to have an outfit change as well?
Oh, no, I think I'm all right. I'm going to stick through it. I'm just going to keep, I'm committed to the Christmas spirit. I'm not saying you're not, Max, but
no, I'm not.
put your Grinch jumper on.
Yeah, I can live with that. It seemed to have gone up about 5 degrees in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Certainly in your room.
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah.
Has Biscuit joined?
He's having a nap in the other room. Biscuit's my dog, in case you were wondering. He does enjoy just looking out the window and wondering what else he could be doing. Very sad.
Waiting for you to finish up the session, Max, so you can take him out for a walk.
Yeah, he seems to have a very good sense of time, and he does know when it's walk time.
Oh, good stuff.
All right, I'll have a quick flick through some of the responses, and conflict with PEDs is an interesting one, and probably not one of the higher risks, but I do acknowledge that. And what I like that they've done with this design, which is consistent with what I was talking about in our last module, is say if you were a rider exiting at this leg, see how the zebra crossing is extended over your path as a rider. It doesn't look overly significant from this angle, but when you're riding it, it is pretty good indication that, okay, I need to give way to pedestrians at this location as well, which I'm actually agree with. I think that's a good solution. Some people mentioned the corners in this shape as well is a bit unusual, which once again, there's two sides of that story. Some people really, really hate this weird octagon shape. We saw the other ones, you know, more of a nice circular ring. I'm much of a muchness. I don't think it's that big of a deal to slow down and do those bends, but it's good to have that feedback. But the one that I will give a prize out to Marissa is the right turn for riders is, you know, a bit further to ride. So if you're using the protected facility and you wanted to do a right turn, although you do have priority across every leg, that will reduce that time. It's certainly not as quick as just taking the circulating area and doing that. And, you know, some people find that very annoying, and so they won't do it. And here's an example of that type of movement occurring, this fellow here. We actually completed an evaluation at this location for a variety of different KPIs and safety metrics. And one of the statistics that I'd like to share is just how well used the protected feature is. So for riders that were traveling through at this location, so in other words, they were using the protected facility and going through, about 91% opted for the protected side of the roundabout, and the other just decided to do what this gentleman here is doing and just ride this carriageway. So 91% is pretty good. It is slightly less though for riders turning right, because as I showed before, that is much higher, much longer journey, more circuitous. And we found about 77% of riders turning right use the protected facility. The remaining 23% used the circulating area. So, you know, take those statistics as you will. Some people think that that's pretty good. That's not so bad. I think that's all right. Others think that's a pretty poor level of compliance and, you know, indicative that the project hasn't met its goals. But I think much more importantly, which is also part of the evaluation, which we did see and was one of the main drivers for the project, was seeing a much higher patronage for this particular corridor. I go into the details as part of our 360-degree video for this module of this site, so I won't give away any spoilers, but there is a bit of history with this project. And yeah, so I think the real driver for this project was just seeing increased participation patronage at this site, which it did achieve. And, you know, if some riders feel more comfortable want to use the carriageway, that's great. If they don't, then they've got the protected facility. So I don't think it's a failure that they haven't got 100% compliance, because we don't get 100% compliance in any area that we do any type of traffic engineering work on. If, however, you were in an environment where you were like, it's really, really important that I do not encourage riders onto the carriageway at all, or onto the circulating area, there is possibility to do that. So as I showed in the first example out of the Netherlands, where you're just basically providing that path and no interaction with the carriageway whatsoever, that can be achieved. This is two different approaches to this roundabout, where basically all you've got is some text, use bike lane at roundabout, and a symbol and an arrow, but it is by no means a challenge for a rider to completely ignore that and just head straight to wherever they want to go. So in the second photo, if, as I mentioned, you did really want to ensure that the majority of your riders are using the protected facility, you can just extend your separation all the way. So if they wanted to use it, they could, but it's probably going to be more inconvenient for you because you'd have to get up over these curbs and, you know, pick a gap in traffic and all that type of thing. So if that was deemed, you know, one of the strong drivers to see a much higher level of compliance or much higher level of usage for the protected facility, you could be advocating for that. Just bringing that separation, all those curbs right up to the protected facility. I'm going to pause here and give everyone a 4-minute break where you can go and eat your mince pies or candy canes or whatever you'd like, and we can continue this discussion in 4 minutes' time. Any questions, Catherine?
Welcome back. Yes, a couple popped in while we were topping up our waters. Cyclists have the same priority as pedestrians when crossing traffic lanes. Is there any warning of this given their speed at the crossing?
I believe so. Before you get to the roundabout, if there's any like pedestrian crossing ahead or give way ahead kind of signage.
I assume so. I assume it's around the advance warning.
Yeah, I can't remember at the top of my head if there is or not, but in this type of environment, I wouldn't see it as being critical because it's relatively low speed, and I think it's incredibly obvious as you're approaching this that there are significant change in the road going ahead, and there is actually already a lot of signage.
There is.
Yeah.
Sometimes there can be too much and the
Yeah.
message can be blurred.
Yeah.
Yes. Just another one in terms of the evaluations that have been done, Max, and what you've touched on. Will that be available in the materials on the LMS?
Unfortunately, because that one was completed for a client, we wouldn't be sharing that, just commercial and confidence stuff. But they, you know, you're more than welcome to approach the project team for that one. If they want to share that, then we can absolutely facilitate that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Max. That's all for now. Thank you.
Pleasure. No worries. So we'll move away from our protected roundabouts and get stuck into some other more challenging environments, I suppose you could say. One being multi-lane roundabouts, which is incredibly stressful for a rider. And I'll move the banner out of the way so we can have a good look. I'll have a bit of a discussion around, you know, some of the risks associated with riding through this area and why really only the fearless types of riders would be here. And in particular, the movement that I'm going to focus on is the right turn. And I'm going to focus on going from the right-hand side of the screen, starting from there and then moving my way up. So to get started, things look not too bad because I'm in an off-road, you know, protected by a curb there facility. And as I approach the hold line and get to here, the first thing that you may or may not notice is that the kind of bicycle facility narrows, shrinks down as you get closer to the hold line. The reason that would have occurred is because there would have been heavy vehicle design swept path checks completed, and trailers would likely be taking that edge line marking that's shown there. And although that narrows the bicycle facility, it would have been more, you know, it would have been prioritized that no, we need to show the edge of the lane for those particular movements. And that's probably why we're seeing that occurring there. But it does create this little squeeze point for riders as they're just getting to this conflict point, which is not great. As they're heading into the intersection, into the roundabout, sorry, there's basically nothing. There's this little green bicycle lane just adjacent the splitter island there. Once again, it's on the periphery. And if this rider wanted to turn right, there's a few scenarios that can happen, which is they continue this journey and then they just stop here and then, you know, basically turn 90 degrees, pick a gap in traffic, cross over there, stop again, pick a gap in traffic, and then continue that movement. I should confirm that there's no curb ramps or pram ramps or anything to actually facilitate that as a journey. But that is one scenario that does happen at these types of locations. Another scenario, which you don't like to think happens, but does happen, is a cyclist turning right from that left-hand position. In other words, doing this type of movement. And I'm sure you can all appreciate why that would be such a significant risk, because there's 2 through lanes where there's conflict points, and they would not be expecting that rider to be turning right at those locations. So I should stress, this is not something that's encouraged or anything like that, or legal by any means, but it does occur because that's where the facility was. That's where they want to get to. They may not be bothered to, have to do that little other demonstration that I gave. And so that could be the most attractive option to that particular rider. If you were riding in that facility and you did have to make, you were determined to do that, you'd basically be trying to turn your neck at this point here to see if there's anyone behind you to, to make that call. So it's not legal, but it does happen. Another option for a rider that was turning right in this environment would be just to ignore this facility altogether. And on approach to this roundabout, get into the right lane. So then you can actually perform your right turn movement with general traffic. Neither of these options are fantastic though. And just to give you some context, this is a rural environment just on the outskirts of quite a large rural town. The speed is 80 kilometers per hour on all of these legs. And it's got, not uncommon to see a rider in this location, but they are your more training, commuter types that are very, very confident, which is unsurprising. Here's what this site actually looks like out on the ground, and perhaps you can see a little bit better what I was talking about with that bicycle lane narrowing on approach to the hold line there. Just looks a bit strange. Others may have noticed that there was a hold line and there is a signal there. Unfortunately, that has nothing to do with cycling through that area. That's installed because there's a boom gate adjacent here and it just goes red to make sure that there's no queuing to block the circulating area of the roundabout. So nothing to do with riders there whatsoever, but very, very significant risks that can occur at multi-lane roundabouts. And the idea of just putting riders in the periphery is very, not recommended at all. I'm going to compare this now to another very similar roundabout. This one is in Canberra, but the way that cycling treatment is applied here is much different. So similarly, I may as well just start from the same side and I'll do the same movement as well. We've got an on-road bicycle lane that gets pushed or transitioned to an off-road facility. So similar to that protected roundabout where we're not encouraging riders to get into the circulating area. The difference here is as riders travel around, they get pushed away further from the circulating area and there's a little hold rail. So for those that haven't seen those things, it's basically just a U-shaped bollard and they give riders somewhere to grab onto. And it's particularly handy for any of your riders that use cleats, those snap-in shoes, because then they don't have to worry about unclipping and that, can just be a bit annoying. So you provide these little U-shaped bollards that can grab onto that, They wait for a gap in traffic before crossing over. They get to this point here. Again, they have to wait, pick a gap in traffic before getting to the median and then finalizing that journey there. Is this longer? Absolutely. This would take quite a while to do a right turn at this location. However, it clearly is an environment where the throughput of traffic has been seen to be the highest priority. Well, this movement of general traffic is a high priority. The ability to be able to force that general traffic to yield and give way to pedestrians and riders is non-existent. Like it's not going to happen. If you put a give way sign there and say, give way to peds and cyclists crossing here, it's just not going to happen. So I much prefer this as an arrangement, acknowledging that it is circuitous, than just doing on-road facilities and saying, well, we've got a bicycle lane there, so you'll be okay. I do think that this is a better option. And I also acknowledge that if you were riding and you were within that fearless category, and as I said, this is a transition into an off-road path there. However, there's nothing really to stop you from using the through traffic lane or the right turn lane there either. So you don't have that separation whereby this is the only path you can take. Instead, it's saying, you know, this is basically where we recommend you to go because we acknowledge the risks associated with multi-lane roundabouts. But also reflect that, well, the people that are probably using this already are already in the, you know, fearless category. And if I provide even the best possible off-road feature, it's likely they won't even touch it. So I don't mind this approach where it's not being absolutely regimented. This is where you need to go. It's acknowledging that there is that diversity. Now, this was touched on before in the chat, which was, do we do any on-road facilities, multi-lane roundabouts? And this was in the old Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 4B. It has been superseded. This diagram no longer exists, and we do not recommend on-road cycling facilities at our multi-lane roundabouts anymore, for the reasons that we've discussed, in that it just gets very confusing, particularly if you're doing right turns, and also vehicles tend to stray into that bicycle lane, which is incredibly common. This concept example I've included just to have a bit of a discussion around that movement in place, which we also briefly spoke about before. If you haven't heard about movement in place before, that's fine. It's not really part of this course, but it's a really good framework and helps to understand that, you know, all of our transport corridors serve kind of two distinct functions. One is the movements of goods and traffic and people, and the other one is a place function, whereby we can have transport corridors that are highly attractive for people to just enjoy, spend time, dwell, congregate, work, all those types of things. That's the real high-level synopsis. There's a lot more information moving in place, but the reason I'm talking about that is because if I look at this carriageway intersection, roundabout, sorry, and I just make some assumptions. I can see east-west or along the left-right here, I've got a divided carriageway and it's multi-lane. Automatically, that's symbolizing to me that's a priority route for general traffic. Like, that's going to be a high-speed environment, and it's going to be really important that traffic have good flows through there, and perhaps it's on a freight route or something like that. So that's some of the assumptions that I'm making purely for the point of this little exercise. Conversely, the north-south legs are undivided. They're one lane, and I'm going to make the assumption that they just connect into a residential community. It's a local access road. There's not much going on there. and not as much traffic. And that desire, the strategic desire to maintain that traffic flow is probably not as important as that east-west. The reason that I'm mentioning this is because that movement of place thinking can then tie into how we offer recommendations for treatments. So when riders are crossing over this local leg, there's actually a raised crossing point being offered. So they get the priority as well as pedestrians, because you know what, that movement of traffic is not as important. We can slow down vehicles and give way to peds and cyclists here. However, when they're crossing over the main thoroughfare or the motorway, it could be, instead, there's a little note there which is saying install grab handles for cyclists at all crossing points. So it's saying we're going to make cyclists yield here because this is really where we want traffic to continue to flow. And I think that's just an example of how we can, reflect on what treatments are most appropriate given their specific context. There is an argument to say that every leg should be consistent and, it should be always the same, but I actually don't think that this is a bad example, because if I think that the east-west leg is a predominant traffic route and that traffic flow should be prioritized, well, surely that would also be a priority cycling route, and that traffic should also be prioritized. So you're kind of achieving both of those objectives by suggesting this kind of treatment. But anyway, that's just an example, and I just wanted to touch on the movement in place there. All right, we'll hop into local roundabouts now, and I will, of course, ask this question, which is the last time we get to do it, which is what's wrong with this photo? So I'll pop that cyclist out of the way, have a good look, and you tell me what's wrong with this photo. I'll give you 30 seconds. I'll also give a prize out if anyone knows where this photo was taken.
So Max,
Hello.
we've got one guess on the location. Is it Launceston, Tasmania?
It is Launceston, Tasmania.
It is.
Give the prize out there. Well done.
Fantastic. Good
This
guess.
is the Peanut Roundabout, which is Elfin Road, Brisbane Street, Lawrence Street in Launceston, just near the
Okay.
Botanic Gardens.
And beautiful. We'll allocate a prize there. Thanks. Lots of answers coming through for you.
Yes, so well done for those that picked up on the Dooring Risk on the other side of the carriageway. That's terrific. The answer that I was, I suppose, looking for is just this bicycle lane end approaching the roundabout, and then there's nothing. So Marissa, we'll give it out to the third person who suggested that. I saw it come through quite a lot of times. Yeah, similar scenario with what we saw with intersections. This was a common way to deal with cyclists approaching roundabouts, is just get rid of the facility and, they'll somehow magically appear at the other end, and that's all good. I've done my job. But this does not give any confidence for riders that, should I be entering the carriageway there, or should I be getting off my bike and getting onto the curb and channel there and using the footpath? It's pretty unclear how you would proceed through there, and we definitely want to eliminate that. So I'm going to focus on local roundabouts now, and local, I'm talking low speed, low volumes, 40, 50 kilometers per hour and 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 maybe vehicles per day. And the way that we tend to see our roundabouts being treated in these scenarios is through the use of sharrows, which I already saw someone allude to as well in the comments. So prize for you as well for saying sharrows. Good on you. And the idea is, well, we may have to end the bicycle lane, but instead we are going to bring cycling traffic into the middle of the traffic lane. And we're going to encourage them to basically treat themselves like a car all the way on approach, through the roundabout, and on the exit. So we actually like to see those sharrows being implemented at the approach and within the circulating area as well. So it gets kind of repeated, probably on each of those legs within the circulating area. So it's clear that riders are not being encouraged to take a curbside position in the periphery, but instead to ride in the middle, make yourself as prominent as possible, and treat yourself like a car, basically. So we've talked about sharrows before, so I won't go into that kind of detail, but I really like to see them when they are being used in conjunction with local area traffic management treatments, particularly speed humps or speed cushions, any kind of vertical deflection. The reason being, if a motorist fails to see the sharrow, the pavement marking, could be heavy rain, it could be they're looking up at the signs instead, or, you know, on their phone or whatever it is, they may not notice the sharrow pavement marking, but they're much more likely to see this type of device, speed hump, that is going to physically slow them down. And in a perfect world, the way that you'd like to see these treatments actually configured is to have this type of device being installed prior to where that merge point is, because you'd want vehicles to be slowing down, and that's where the conflict point is, as opposed to conflict point and then slow down. You're likely to see a much improved speed reduction if it was done the other way around. So just something to take a note of for your future projects. A way to encourage that sharrow use is to install vertical deflection devices leading up to where that merge point is. Here's another example of a different type of local area management, traffic management treatment being implemented. Similar kind of idea though. Ideally, we would have liked to have seen this hump being installed prior to that merge point, and then riders merge at that location there where vehicle speeds are much lower. So that's all I want to talk about really with sharrows. So we're not saying protected roundabouts in every single location. Instead, we acknowledge that, you know, these lower speed, lower traffic volumes routes can be quite comfortable for riders to claim the traffic lane and, you know, just use that space. And it's something that Queensland is doing a lot of at the moment with those bicycle awareness zones. I believe that's the term, or activation zones, no, bicycle awareness zones, BAZ. Is this kind of idea where, you know, we don't really have the infrastructure just to continue to build more and more and separate, and it's probably only going to be achieved on those really high risk locations, which would be arterial, where you've got lots of traffic and higher speeds and things like that. These more residential connections, we should just be trying to do what we can to encourage riders to take that central position and encourage other motorists to slow down and expect to see cyclists riding in the traffic lane. Now, I'm going to spend the rest of this session going through a little bit of some education campaigns, because I acknowledge that whilst we may work within the design space or engineering or providing technical advice for others to do that kind of work, it's only one part of the puzzle, and as been touched on multiple times in these sessions, is well, what about the community? What do they expect, and how can we improve their kind of acceptance that riders are going to be here? Because there is a relatively, upsetting attitude towards riders. They don't always acknowledge that these are just other people, that they're seen as a bit of annoyance and things like that. So I wanted to share some examples of campaigns that have occurred in other jurisdictions, which I think are quite effective. And then I'm going to spend the last part of today's module going through the assignment. And there is a few bits and pieces to consider with the assignment. So I've really got to step you through it piece by piece, just to make sure that it's crystal clear. And if you do have any concerns about the assignment, you've got this opportunity right now to ask your questions away. But as I mentioned, it's not all engineering, and we do need to think about, the users themselves, and reminds our community that people that are riding are people. They're incredibly vulnerable. This is an ad campaign that is run yearly in California, where every June they just nominate that is their bike month. Also coincides when, their summer month, where they're probably getting more of the cycling participation rates as well. And they basically just dot these signs on bus shelters and hand out brochures and pamphlets at train stations and things like that, just as a continual reminder that, the carriageway, although historically has just been for cars, is no longer the way that we kind of view this world, and instead it is all of us as people that have access to that public domain. Whilst I'll rabbit on about these different campaigns, I'm going to get Marissa to launch a poll just to close off this session. So I'll let Marissa do that in the background. Hey, there we go. It is just the exact same question that we started off with, which is, please rate your level of cycling infrastructure knowledge on completion of this training. And your options are very knowledgeable, aware but don't know much, or not aware. And I'll just keep chatting through this while you fill that one out. Another one, I guess you could call it a campaign, is more of like a, I forgot the word, like protest, I guess, where people all over the world on Twitter started this hashtag, which was Red Cup Project, where they'd go out to their bicycle lane and place a red cup in a line, and then a few hours later go out and see how well that red cup fared. And invariably it didn't take long to get crushed. Other people got a bit more theatric and put things like tomatoes and apples and things like that as in their red cup, just to demonstrate to anyone that, this is how frequently bicycle lanes are entered by traffic, and also how vulnerable cyclists are as well. So it doesn't take much for a vehicle to veer out of their lane. It doesn't take much for a rider to be knocked off their bike and potentially end in pretty dire circumstances. So it was a pretty prolific campaign a few years ago now. We saw examples of this in Sydney and Melbourne and parts of Asia. I believe it started over in North America though, but it did kind of go global, and it was a trend. This one's my favorite though. This is an example out of New York, where an individual on his commute to work used to ride in this bicycle lane, which was just a painted line, and he just got fed up with having lots of vehicles enter that space, so decided to just head to the local hardware store and purchase about 100 plungers or so, and just epoxied or glued all of them down in regular increments to provide his own protected bicycle lane, which, credit to him, is just amazing vigilante justice. Like, just build it yourself. Unfortunately, this was not a successful trial. New York Council did rip this up because it was not, an approved product. They didn't want to accept that liability. And as far as I'm aware, to this day, there is still no protected facility. So unfortunately, this person's objective was not met, but still, you've got to admire that determination. The last one I wanted to share was this See Cyclist Think Horse, which just a video out of Scotland that ran multiple years ago now. And yeah, just a little video ad that you can watch after today's session. Unfortunately, it also was quite short-lived because this woman in the ad caused quite a bit of a stir. Lots of people were writing to complain that she was cycling without a helmet, which is not a legal requirement in the UK, but people still found it very upsetting to see that on their TVs. And people were also incredibly upset that she wasn't riding closer to the Kirban Channel, which is a lovely, rough, bluestone, bumpy ride for you there. But yeah, it got lots of complaints for those reasons, and unfortunately did get pulled. But I think it's a good ad, and it's an example of using humor as part of campaigns, which I think is a really effective way to engage with your community or your audience, because they're much more likely to take that messaging on if there's a bit of fun to it, and it's just much more memorable as well. I am by no means a marketing campaign manager. I like to share these ads because I watch a lot of them. We do have a Module 4 360-degree video where you will get to ride through Melbourne's protected roundabout. And you'll also get to see what it feels like riding in the periphery of a conventional roundabout. And in the example too, actually, I'd really recommend, as I am riding to perform a right turn, face the camera behind, so turn around on yourself, so you can see the oncoming vehicle that's going through. And you can see just how uncomfortable that experience is. So it's good if you've never had to do that yourself, just get that perspective. Now, I'll hop into the LMS, but I'll just check in with Marissa and Catherine to see if we've had any questions so far.
Hello. I thought there was a real hello again. So it was a really good point raised about cyclists and pedestrians using footpaths. And I know the rules were updated in WA a few years back to actually allow cyclists to use footpaths. So I guess just more of a comment and some thoughts around that, Max.
Yeah, so multiple jurisdictions do allow riders on footpaths. Victoria does not, unless you're a child or you're with a child. I understand arguments from both sides of these things, and it's a pretty complex debate. Nothing I'm probably going to solve in for the next 5 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever. But I'm interested to hear anyone in the chats here as well.
Yeah, for sure. All good for the moment, Max.
Excellent. Okay, I'll go through the assignment then. So in Module 4 on the LMS, you'll see, as always, the 360-degree video, the presentation from today. There's also a letter to LGA's template, which you can download, and I'll open that up in a second. And Module 4 assignment. So if you click on Module 4 assignment, it's just going to take you to a Word document, which is called Module 4 assignment, Safe Cycling Infrastructure. And I've got both of these documents open. And I'm going to start with the Module 4 assignment. So this is what this one looks like. All right. As I said, I am going to be pretty descriptive on these steps just to make sure that everyone is fully aware of what is required of them and how to get their certificate and things like that. So bear with me. Apologies if I sound a bit dull at the moment, but we just need to get through this information. All right. Step 1, we want you to select a site that has existing cycling facilities. So it could be an on-road bicycle path, it could be a shared path, could be a protected lane, whatever you've got. Pick something that works for you and that's convenient. Step number 2, review bike spots and check for any existing community concerns. So this is the software or the program that Amy Giller Foundation has launched recently with CrowdSpot and the federal government. And if you click on Launch Map, it is basically a map of Australia where anyone can drop a pin and say, this is a safe part of my ride or this is unsafe. Now, the reason that we're pointing you towards this is because it could help you contextualize some of the issues that riders are facing and could give you an appreciation of that perspective. So you could actually do this step first and pick a site that had some pins on it so you could use that, but it's not a requirement. If your site that you've selected doesn't have any pins, that's completely fine. So this is really just to show, or just to see if there's any of that existing information. So as an example, I'm just going to zoom into Frankston, which is where I live in Melbourne. And I'm going to pick this site here. And I'm going to click on this one here, and I can see a pin has already been dropped there. And the description of this pin says, vehicles turning right from Overton Road have really restricted views due to the curves on Nepean Highway. Cycling on Nepean Highway at this location is a bit hairy. And if you look carefully, Max added this spot, so you know it's good. Someone has also agreed with that and said that it's all terrible in this location, and they supported me, which is pretty nice. So yeah, it's nice to be validated. But maybe that's the location I picked because I know where that is. It's close to me and I'm familiar with that, and there's a pin there. So that's how the Bike Spot program can be utilized. Once again, if there's no pins, that's completely fine. We will actually get you to visit the site. So this is why we want you to pick something that works for you. So pick something that's close to your home, close to your office, or as you're picking up the kids from school. We want to make it convenient. We don't want you to have to travel to do this assignment, or, we don't want this to be onerous for you. So please just keep that in mind and pick something that works for you. Step number 4 is answer the questions listed below. And I'm just going to skip straight ahead and have a look at what those questions are. And they're very straightforward. What infrastructure currently exists? And we will be marking you on you using the correct jargon or the correct terminology. So don't worry about grammatical errors or anything like that. This is just about you using the language that we have presented within these modules. The reason that we're marking on that metric is so that if you are within an industry and communicating, I want to install a protected bicycle lane, that is a mutual understanding of what that is. Second question is, what are the hazards for cyclists? So this is where you get to put on your critical hat and you get to really examine the existing environment and think about, well, if I was riding through here, what would make the hairs prick up for me? What would be a risk? So an opportunity for you to combine all of the modules that we've gone through and identify any of the hazards that are applicable to the cycling community. Last question, what could be installed to better improve safety for cyclists? So this does follow a very similar kind of structure to our assignment 2, but now you get to pick your own site. And we want to hear from you, well, this is what's existing. What else can we do to improve that? So All of these answers do not need to be massive endeavors on your part. In fact, I'll scroll back up now and go back to step 4. And we actually encourage all participants to present your answers to those questions in any form that suits you. So previously we've had participants do videos, we've had TikToks being shared with us, we've had poems being written, we've had comic book sketches, really creative things. We've had like families go out with their little children and do like a little mock theater play. It's really, really exciting as someone that has to mark 100 assignments to have that bit of diversity. But you are by no means marked on your creativity. So it's only if you've got an idea and you feel comfortable, you know, using a particular form, you know, go for it. We're up for it. Give it a go and we'll be happy to. We're only marking you on the way that you respond to those questions, but the way you deliver your responses is completely up to you. If you feel most comfortable filling in a Word document, go for that. That's completely fine. Or if you want to do a little sketch on the back of a piece of paper, that's also fine. So we're very, very open to submissions in that regard. Yeah, but we do like to see the creativity, but you're not marked on it. Once you have completed your submission, you upload it to the LMS, just like you've done for the module 2. Now, there may be some file size limit restrictions, depending on what you're uploading. If you're doing a couple gig of videos, well, that's going to take a long time to upload. We might have to talk about other ways that we can potentially mark that assignment. But just keep that in mind that we don't need, you know, massive files or anything like that. In fact, for this assignment, including the site inspection, I'd be expecting 1 to 2 hours tops. So we don't want you spending days and days completing this assignment. We just want to ensure that we've adequately communicated the content of this course and you feel comfortable in providing us those responses. Now, the optional step 6 there is that if you wanted to, you can fill in a letter to your LGA or the LGA within that specific area that you're investigating. It may not be the LGA, it could be the State Road Authority, or it could be a letter to the minister, whatever. We've just created this letter template for you, which says, I've recently completed this training provided by SSS and the Amy Gillard Foundation. Part of this course, I inspected a section of Frankston City Council cycling network. The site I assessed was at Nepean Highway and Overton Road. I wish to alert Council to the following design features that increase the risk of cyclist crashes at this location. And you can just dot point it out. You can just copy that straight from your assignment as well. I recommend Council looks at the following treatments that could be implemented at this site to improve safety for cyclists. And once again, you just copy that from your assignment, paste it in here. The below paragraph is only applicable if you manage to find any other markers on BikeSpot. And you can say, well, other community members have also brought this up as a safety concern, and this is where you can find their their markers that they've already dropped. And then there's a chance just for you to sign this off. This is optional. You do not have to do this. We've just found lots of people that go through this course are like, I've done this assignment, I've done this kind of risk assessment, I wish it kind of led somewhere. And they've kind of asked to have this next step in the process. So some people, take this chance to advocate for better facilities, and we just thought we'd provide that platform or provide that resource, but it's entirely up to you whether or not you want to send that. And I appreciate that some of you may be coming from that particular LGA, so you might have to address it to yourself, which we've had people do as well. So some people like to write to themselves, I guess. Give it a go. Why not? That is the assignment. I hope that was all clear. It is due next Thursday. So we don't allow a lot of time. The reason being, we find that we do get the highest, hit rates as soon as all the content is fresh, and the more that you put it off, the harder it then goes back to revisit these things. So strongly encourage you just to get on it when you've got the time, just to complete this. As I said, we don't want to spend lots and lots of time with this assignment. And I should make a note that we will be taking a break over the Christmas period. We finish up on the 19th and we'll be back on the 8th of January. So you actually may not get your grade until early next year, but so maybe there is a little bit of more space for that due date. But in saying that, the quicker you get it to us, it just ensures that we've got all those records ready to go for the new year. Marissa?
Yeah, no, you've covered everything off. I was just going to touch on the same thing about the due date there, and that will be closed for the Christmas break for a few weeks. So yeah, the gradings will start coming in early the new year.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Few final points, and then I'll let you all go if there's no more questions, which is back to our LMS under resources and reference documents and resources. There's a really good document, and they're all really good documents, but one in particular is Cycling 360 footage examples. And this is just a link to different cycling treatments. So say a year down the track, you forget, what does a bidirectional bicycle protected lane look like? We've just given you this resource so you can, click on this link and I'll show you, oh, that's what that means. And it's 360, so you can look at that again. We've also provided this little bit of a legend about, things that are on the better side versus things that we wouldn't do. And to be honest, if you're going to watch any of them, just watch the ones that are please no, so you remember this is not what we want to see at all. So it's just a really handy reference. Save that to your desktop. Make sure you've got that. Lots of emojis coming through. This is exciting.
There go the emojis. Actually, they've held off for most of the session today.
Yeah, that's lovely. And the final thing I wanted to mention is feedback. So we do require our participants to provide feedback. It's 2 minutes or something like that, so it's not going to take long. But we have genuinely made this an iterative process where we are injecting new things as part of this course and, taking things away and tweaking things based on what our participants are telling us. So we really value your input. And if there's things that you really liked or things that you would change, just let us know. That's your opportunity. We've got this share your achievement online little folder here as well. And what that is, it's basically if you wanted to post your certificates or achievements on LinkedIn or other social media, we've already written you a blurb to make it nice and easy so you can kind of copy and paste. And we've done these little badges. So if you just save that to your computer and you can upload that onto whichever social media platform, text is there and you're good to go. Just to make your life a little bit easier if that's what you're interested in doing. The final thing I'll say is Safe Cycling Infrastructure Certificate. In order for you to actually be able to click that link and get your certificate, you have to have completed the quizzes. Both the assignments have to have been, a lot of raised hands there. Oh no, there we go. Both of the assignments have to have been marked and graded, and you've got your successful completion. The feedback form has to be completed, and then you can click on that. You got your certificate. You've passed the course. That's it from me.
I think everything's covered.
That's great.
If you have any questions, anyone, please let us know. Yep, everything that Max has already mentioned. Yeah, please complete your quizzes and your assignment tasks. If you have any questions, shoot us an email at training@safesystemsolutions.com.au. Catherine, any questions?
No, all good. Just the one really. For the assignment, Max, is a single intersection okay to assess or a section of corridor okay? You don't want to see kilometers of treatment.
No,
Or-
that's completely
yeah.
fine. Yep, it'd be good to see the approach to that particular intersection, but that sounds great.
Yeah, great.
Mhm.
Couple more. Does the site have to be a roundabout or just any cycling facility?
Any cycling facility is completely fine.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Great.
Right. Well, I want to say thank you to Marissa and Catherine for moderating these sessions and just doing all this wonderful work in the background so I can present all this content. And thank you everyone as well for being such an enthusiastic and engaged audience. It makes everyone's life a lot easier when there is that participation, and super excited to see the next group of cycling gurus out there and advocating for improved safety on their cycling networks. And yeah, excited for the festive period, and I wish you all a safe and wonderful holiday experience.
And thank
Yes.
you to Max for doing a wonderful job.
Yes,
It was
absolutely.
very enjoyable. And to Marissa as well. It's been a great team effort and a great
Thank
group.
you. Thank you, Catherine. Yes, and thank you, Max. And we hope you've all enjoyed the course. And yeah, have a lovely afternoon and a safe holidays.
Safe
That's it.
holidays, everyone. Enjoy.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.